I'd like to introduce Shana Nys Dambrot. She's an art critic, curator, and author who is currently the LA managing editor of Flavorpill. She'll be speaking about leadership and social media, how new media formats are changing the cultural landscape. Please welcome Shana.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for giving me a lift up the mountain, Bill Marino, in exchange for 90 seconds of my time. That seems like a fair trade. A lot of you who may have read my work might know that I don't drive a car. I know, that's probably a topic for a whole other conversation. No questions about that at the end. It'll go on too long. I just want to say I'm really excited to be part of this presentation today, mostly because in my role as publisher of Flavorpill and working with a couple of other different kinds of culture-based publications in LA, I tend to get information. I get like 200 or 300 emails a day and, from a variety of places, and I recognize names, not always faces, and also I often find myself wishing that it was appropriate and that I had the time to sort of hit reply and just start a conversation outside of the content of the information that the email contains, because so often I sort of become aware of the little kind of peccadillos in the way that a lot of the differences between the way individual artists, commercial galleries, and different kinds of institutions communicate with the media. And I've been really inspired by some of the things that have been said earlier today, especially the conversation with Joan about branding. Because I remember not too long ago, the idea of branding was a bad word, right? It came out of advertising, and branding meant figure out what your brand is so that you can replicate success stories. And it sort of became the enemy of innovation. And I remember thinking when I had a boyfriend who was a big advertising person, so this was like a big conversation around the house, and I remember asking him with no satisfaction whatsoever, what if your brand is something different all the time? What if your brand is eclecticism and surprise? Then what do you do? And he'd sort of go, oh, well, that's, it was like dismissed because it was just, cognitive dissonance, and what is that? But what I've started to see is a lot of people sort of taking that idea on. And so you go, well, what you can expect is something new, or what you can expect is to be surprised, or what you can expect is the unexpected, or that kinds of things. And I think that a lot of the improvements, and then also the slightly exaggerated downside of this sort of dissemination of engagement in arts institutions that is the result of the social media proliferation in our culture, sort of relate exactly to that. Because you've got so many ways to get your message in front of people. You've got so many websites, so many email services, so many BuzzFeeds and Tumblrs and Stumbled Upons, and so many niche publications, and so much content is free that people just sort of, what a lot of people do is they take their established brand identity and then they just blanket that everywhere, and they put the same information in a million different places, and that is good because it maybe gets new eyeballs, but it's, I think, a failure to really embrace what the technology has to offer sort of on its own terms. And so I really like things that Joan and other people were saying about not only using the available technology, but really figuring out what that relationship is. And then that is a factor of resources, it's a factor of generations, it's a factor of, all of these things. And so what I wanted to talk about a little bit today is how I think cultural institutions, organizations, and certain kinds of museums are sort of like this, can often be the slowest moving force in the art landscape to catch up, because individual artists are just people. If they're good at technology, great, they're off to the races. Commercial galleries have other kinds of pressures and responsibilities, and so they can use those things to promote themselves a little bit more relentlessly, and they're kind of allowed to do that. And plus, the people working the front offices at galleries and things like that tend to be younger people who are going to just by default generally be more familiar with the technology. And so there's sort of two threads I want to talk about today, and one of them has to do with the title of, my part, which is how it's changed the landscape of cultural media and sort of art criticism. Because I get asked this a lot. I started out, my art history degree from Vassar and a very sort of academic, scholarly, sort of art critical career, where at one time I think I had like 10 print publications that I worked for periodically. And now I have one which is launching. Actually, it doesn't even exist yet as a print. And everything else is primarily online. That's Flavorpill, never existed in print. It never even made that transition. It was always entirely online. White Hot Magazine, which is still a little bit more academic in its content in terms of art criticism, is entirely online. And they print one thing a year so that they can get into art fair print booths, but they're not a print publication. And so, and then you get into ideas of, well, that means it has to be, on some level, you have a shorter attention span, so your print length might be less, but on the other hand, you have all of these amazing technologies at your disposal where you can include more high-res images. In a magazine, you've got one little tiny one, maybe it's Art Week was black and white. There's nothing you could do. Now Art Review exists entirely online, and that part of the reason they've done that, they've enhanced it with amazing high-res photographs and a tool where you can go in and see detail. If you're reviewing a video artist, you can embed video in your review. You don't have to describe what it would be like if it were moving. You can give it to them. You can put 10 images and installation shots. You can really, sort of use the technology to do something that only the technology gives you the opportunity to do. And so that has sort of shifted some of the way that art criticism is produced and absorbed in the world. And again, that could be an interesting conversation almost for another time, because this is much more about institutions and engaging audiences and what I feel like what technology can do for that. And one of the things that I've heard a lot about today is this idea of disseminating information and how these technologies supposedly make that easier. But what you have to understand is that it's made it easier for every single person in the world, right? So you think that the climate of noise to rise above was hard when people were just stuffing envelopes. Try Facebook, where you get 50 event invitations a day. God only knows how many. So it's made it easier for you, but it's made it easier for everyone else too. And so you almost are sort of starting over from this level playing field that has positive implications for small d democratic culture, and then makes it even harder to kind of rise above. But the beautiful thing about things like technology is that for one thing, it's carving out niches within arts organizations for younger people, because they know something that now they have something that even these sort of eminence gris arts organizations need. They need somebody who understands Twitter and how to use it, and how to use it well, and how not to sort of insult your audience by just being on Facebook. You know what I mean? Not to get political, but the idea is like, you see, like, I got a tweet today from Antonio Villaraigosa, right? And I want to tell you that, for one thing, no part of me thinks he did that himself. And also, it was this vainglorious sort of, oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled and humbled by this amazing article about me. You should read it. And it's like, okay, yeah, thank you for sending the link, but that sort of lame attempt at authenticity of voice, and to kind of like be down on like the street level of people who tweet, is so condescending, right? I mean, we all get this stuff and you just shake your head. And so what I really, really wanted to talk about today is how to sort of use these democratizing technologies without dumbing your program down. Because I think a lot of times what happens is people think that they need younger audiences is the holy grail of the museum development department, right? And just being on Facebook and Twitter is sort of not enough. You have to actually understand what that dynamic is and who a lot of your audience is for receiving their cultural information online. And one thing is it may seem that because it's sort of simple and casual in tone, that is enough, right, to sort of gain the trust of the younger generations. But we are all crazy media savvy. We know about being marketed to. We sit and deconstruct ads, and we amuse ourselves by saying, oh, my God, they think they're marketing. Oh, that's who the show thinks it's marketing to. Oh, and we're so clued into that stuff. And there's no way to trick us. So transparency and authenticity and respect for the native intelligence of the audience still has to migrate into the use of more casual, accessible kinds of communication systems like you might find in Facebook or something like that. And that sort of brings me to how I got here to this podium. I was invited by the folks at EALLA. It's like a little EALLA, right? Based on them having seen me in a couple places, and I guess I was sort of did my thing where I was kind of like funny and, you know, a little cheeky or whatever, and they thought it would be entertaining, and that's definitely true. I mean, you know, Susan Sontag used to be my hero. It's Rachel Maddow now, you know, and I'm serious, and part of it is because her style is so engaging and funny, and she does goofy things, but in the bottom line, she's incredibly intelligent, incredibly knowledgeable, authoritative, and trustworthy. So it's this combination, this middle path. And that ultimately is the lesson that I think I want to hopefully impart. But the anecdote, which is, I don't know if everyone's heard this, apologize. But I have a blog, and on it, I wrote an entry a few months ago when Mocha did this whole thing with General Hospital at the PDC, and they pretended like their thing with James Franco was real performance art, right? And, you know, and this was meant to engage non-art audiences and, like, get them into the museum by having this, like, soap opera star who's, like, the worst painter ever, like, be this, and plays a serial killer who's also an artist. It's so wrong on so many levels. And I wrote this thing. It was so bad, right? And then I wrote this, and, you know, it's like you could do it, but they weren't transparent about it. They didn't, like, admit that it was funny. They had no irony. It was so condescending. So I wound up sort of writing this blog, and I called Jeffrey Deitch a Deitch bag. Thank you. Thank you, good night. And, you know, by the way, it's funny. I mean, gee, God, it's still funny. But the reason that I did that is, and it's truly hilarious, I know, but it speaks to a real genuine anger, I think, that a lot of people of my generation and younger really feel, where we're not, just because we don't have art degrees doesn't mean we're stupid or not curious-minded, and that there's a difference between making something accessible and dumbing it down. And people know when they're being spoken down to. And I think that, you know, one of the most promising ways to use internet technology is to create points of access and points of entry. I often say at Flavorpill that, and in all my writing, that my favorite audience are smart people without art degrees, right? Because here's the situation. Most people are smart enough that once you get them in a museum or a gallery or in front of something, they understand it. They know they're going to find something in there for them. They're going to be able to find the value for them. They are allowed to not like things. They're allowed to have taste. They're allowed to have opinions of their own that don't have to be sort of ratified by some kind of, you know, Brahmin pedigree. But they don't know that, because our culture has schooled them to believe that art is an elitist thing, that if you don't know about it now, you will never know about it. This is not for you.